right now as you're watching this, a ceasefire that was supposed to bring stability to one of the most volatile regions on the planet is collapsing in real time. Donald Trump drew a line. He made it public. He used the word prohibited. And Israel looked at that line and stepped right over it, not quietly, not apologetically, openly. What does that tell us about who is actually in control of American foreign policy right now? I need you to stay with me for the next 20 minutes, because what I'm about to walk you through goes far deeper than anything you're seeing in mainstream coverage. Subscribe before we go further. You'll understand why by the end. Let's establish exactly where we are, because context is everything here, and without it, you're only seeing half the picture. Go back to late 2024. The region is on fire. Lebanon has been absorbing Israeli bombardment for months. Hezbollah is taking heavy losses. But Iran, the critical player that most analysts are either ignoring or deliberately downplaying, Iran draws a hard line. Tehran's message to any potential negotiating table is unambiguous. If you want us back in the room talking about our nuclear program, the destruction of Lebanon has to stop. Full stop. That is their stated condition. So when Trump comes in and announces that he has brokered a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon, on the surface, this looks like a genuine diplomatic win. And I want to be fair here, but securing any kind of agreement in that environment is not nothing. The language Trump used was that Israel would be more low-key. That phrase alone should have told us something. Not peace, not cessation of hostilities. Low-key. Here is where I need you to zoom out with me for a moment. This ceasefire was not just about Lebanon. It was the first thread in a much larger diplomatic web, one that connects directly to Iran's nuclear ambitions, to regional stability, and ultimately to whether the Middle East moves toward negotiation or towards something far more dangerous. Every piece of this is connected. So when Trump posts publicly on Truth Social, and I want you to hold this word in your mind, that Israel is prohibited from bombing Lebanon, he is not just making a domestic political statement. He is sending a signal to Tehran. He is saying, the condition you demanded is being honored. And then, within hours, that signal is shattered. The question is not what happened next. You already know what happened next. The real question is, was this always the plan? Here is where the story stops being diplomatic background noise and becomes something you cannot look away from. Within hours, not days, not weeks, hours after Trump posts that word, prohibited, on Truth Social, an Israeli drone lifts off in southern Lebanon and kills a man on a motorcycle. One person. Gone. And the response from Israel? Silence. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that a sitting United States president had just told them in public, in writing, that this was forbidden. Do you see what happened here? I need you to sit with that for a second. The most powerful man in the world draws a line, and the country that receives more American military and financial support than almost any other nation on earth looks at that line and erases it within hours. Now here is where most coverage stops. They report the drone strike, they note the contradiction, and they move on. But I am not going to do that, because what was happening on the ground in Lebanon during this so-called ceasefire is something that reframes this entire situation completely. There is a policy, and I want you to remember this term, called the money plow. This is not a theory. This is not speculation. This comes directly from Israeli commanders speaking to journalists at Haaretz, which is an Israeli publication. What these commanders described is a system in which civilian contractors operating in southern Lebanon are paid, compensated, based on the number of buildings they destroy. Not military installations, not weapons depots, buildings, homes, public structures, schools. Let that land. During a ceasefire, while Trump is telling the world that Lebanon is off limits, Israeli contractors are receiving daily payments or per building bonuses to systematically demolish civilian infrastructure in Lebanese villages. This is not a rogue operation. This is organized. This is budgeted. This is a policy with a name. And here is where I want to zoom out, because this pattern is not new. We saw the same systematic destruction play out in Gaza. The same contractors, the same incentive structure, the same outcome. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. with the justification that it was all military infrastructure. Except now we have Israeli commanders on record telling their own press that it is not. So ask yourself this. If this is what is happening during a ceasefire, what exactly does the word ceasefire mean in this context? Now let's talk about Trump's response, because this is the part that I think reveals more than anything else about the current state of American foreign policy. After Israel defies his direct public prohibition, after the drone strike, after the money plow reporting surfaces, Trump goes on Truth Social and posts one of the most unconditional endorsements of Israel you will ever read from a sitting American president. He calls Israel courageous, bold, loyal, smart. He says they have shown their true colors in a moment of conflict and stress. He says, and I am being precise here, that Israel fights hard and knows how to win. Now, I want to offer you 3 possible explanations for why a president responds this way after being publicly defied. And I want to be clear, these are analytical frameworks, not established facts. The first possibility is that Trump genuinely believes the relationship with Israel is too strategically important to fracture over what he may privately view as a minor violation. The second possibility is that the public praise is a deliberate pressure tactic, a way of binding Israel to a standard they are now publicly expected to meet. The third possibility, and this is the one that should concern you most, is that the praise reflects something closer to deference than strategy. I am not telling you which one is true. I am telling you that the answer to that question determines everything about where this goes next. Because here is the thing. When you reward defiance with praise, you do not discourage defiance. You teach the other party exactly how much they can get away with. And the lesson Israel appears to be drawing from this moment is a very specific one. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you goes even deeper. Let's go beneath the surface, because what you've seen so far, the drone strike, the money plow, the unconditional praise, those are symptoms. What I want to talk about now is the disease. Let me start with Benjamin Netanyahu, because I think he is the most misunderstood figure in this entire equation. Not because people think too poorly of him, but because most analysis stops at the surface level of he wants to win the war. That framing misses something fundamental. Netanyahu is currently a defendant. He is facing criminal charges in Israeli courts: corruption, breach of trust, fraud. Charges that, under normal circumstances, would have already resulted in a verdict. But here is the critical detail that most mainstream outlets bury in paragraph 14 if they mention it at all. His trial has been repeatedly delayed. And the primary justification for those delays is the ongoing state of war. I want you to zoom in on that mechanism for a moment. As long as Israel is at war, Netanyahu's trial does not proceed at normal speed. As long as his trial does not proceed, he remains in power. As long as he remains in power, he controls the decisions that determine whether Israel is at war. Do you see the loop? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented, publicly acknowledged dynamic that Israeli legal scholars and journalists inside Israel have been writing about for over a year. The question I am raising, and I want to be precise that this is an analytical question, not a conclusion, is whether a man whose political survival depends on the continuation of conflict can ever be a genuine partner in ending it. Now let's zoom out to the pattern of behavior, because Netanyahu and the Israeli government have spent the last several years doing something very specific. They have been testing the limits of what the United States will tolerate. And the results of those tests have been consistent. The United States sets a condition. Israel acknowledges the condition. Israel then acts in direct contradiction to the condition. The United States responds with frustration, then with softer language, then with continued support. Repeat, this happened under Obama. It happened under Biden, who famously threatened to condition arms shipments on humanitarian access and then did not follow through in any meaningful way. And now, based on everything we have seen in the last 72 hours, the early evidence suggests it is happening under Trump as well. Here is a specific data point I want you to hold on to. Over the past 3 years, the United States government has issued, by various counts, more than a dozen formal expressions of concern or warning to Israel regarding civilian casualties, settlement expansion, or military conduct. The number of times those warnings have resulted in concrete policy consequences, meaning actual suspension or reduction of military aid, is effectively zero. What does that teach the other party? It teaches them that American warnings are negotiating theater, not policy reality. Now bring Iran back into this picture, because Iran has not left the room, even if the cameras have stopped pointing at them. Tehran's condition for nuclear negotiations was a genuine ceasefire in Lebanon. What they are watching right now is a ceasefire that exists on paper and nowhere else. Israeli drones are still flying. Lebanese villages are still being demolished under the money plow program. And the American president, who declared the ceasefire, is publicly praising the country that broke it. From Tehran's perspective, and again, I am offering an analytical framework here, not a defense of Iranian foreign policy. The message they are receiving is that American guarantees are not reliable, that whatever Trump promises at the negotiating table can be undone by Israeli action on the ground within 24 hours. And if Iran concludes that American guarantees cannot be trusted, what incentive do they have to return to any negotiating table at all? This is the real stakes of what happened in the last week. Not just a drone strike, not just a demolished village. The potential collapse of the only diplomatic framework that stands between the current situation and something significantly worse. I need you to keep that in your mind as we move forward, because what comes next is the moment that I believe actually shifted public opinion in a way that geopolitical analysis alone never could. There are moments in a conflict that cut through the noise, not because they are necessarily the most consequential in strategic terms, but because they make something visible that was previously easy to look away from. What I am about to describe is one of those moments. A video surfaces. An Israeli Defense Forces soldier in southern Lebanon. In front of him is a statue of Jesus Christ. The statue has been toppled, and the soldier in uniform on duty with what appears to be a mallet is filmed smashing the head of the statue. The video is posted. It spreads. Within hours, it is everywhere. Now, the first instinct for a lot of people when something this extreme surfaces is to ask, is this real? Is this generated? Is this taken out of context? Those are legitimate questions, and I want to address them directly. The Israeli Defense Forces themselves confirmed the authenticity of the footage. They verified it. This happened. This is not disputed. I need you to understand the weight of that confirmation. This is not a claim made by a hostile media outlet. This is the Israeli military acknowledging that one of their soldiers operating in southern Lebanon during an active ceasefire destroyed a Christian religious symbol on camera. The official response came quickly. The Israeli Defense Forces released a statement describing the soldiers' conduct as wholly inconsistent with the values expected of its troops. Netanyahu's office put out a response. An investigation was announced. And on the surface, you might read that as an appropriate institutional reaction. But here is where I want you to zoom out, because the response itself tells you something critical if you know what to look for. Ask yourself this question. Over the course of this conflict, there has been documented destruction of mosques, churches, and civilian religious sites across Gaza and Lebanon. The reporting on this is extensive and comes from multiple independent sources. In how many of those cases did Netanyahu personally respond within hours? In how many did the Israeli Defense Forces issue a same-day statement describing the conduct as wholly inconsistent with their values? The answer tells you exactly why this particular incident triggered a different response. It was not the destruction of a religious symbol that alarmed the Israeli government. It was whose religious symbol it was. The political calculus here is not complicated. The Trump administration's base, the voters whose continued support Netanyahu needs if American foreign policy is going to remain favorable, is overwhelmingly Christian and conservative. An image of an Israeli soldier smashing the face of Jesus Christ with a mallet is not something you can spin for that audience. It is not something you can frame as a security necessity. It hits differently, and the Israeli government knows it. Here is what that image actually represents beyond the politics. There are Christian communities in Lebanon. There are Christian families who have lost homes, who have lost relatives, whose churches sit in the path of the money plow. That reality existed before this video. American media barely covered it. But now there is an image, and images do what statistics cannot. They make the abstract personal. The soldier's mallet did not just strike a statue, it cracked something in the narrative that had been holding together American public support, and once that crack appears, it does not close. What comes next is harder to discuss, but it is necessary. Because if the image of a destroyed statue shocked you, what I am about to walk you through is something that should have generated 10 times the outrage and has instead been met with near total silence in mainstream American media. I want to be precise about how I present what comes next. What I am about to describe consists of allegations. Allegations that have been reported by multiple independent outlets, documented by human rights organizations, and corroborated by accounts from numerous separate sources. These are not verdicts. No court has issued a final ruling, but the volume and consistency of documentation has reached a point where dismissing this as unverified propaganda requires a level of willful ignorance that I am not willing to extend to my audience. With that said, I need you to prepare yourself, because this is not easy to hear. There are documented allegations reported by Al Jazeera, cross-referenced by international human rights monitors, of Palestinian detainees being subjected to sexual violence inside Israeli detention facilities. Not isolated incidents, a pattern that includes, among other documented accounts, the use of animals to assault detainees. I'm not going to sensationalize this. The facts, as reported and documented, are already beyond what most people's minds want to accept as real. What I will tell you is that these accounts come from multiple detainees describing consistent methods in facilities that were already known before these allegations surfaced for documented abuse. One of the facilities at the center of these reports is the same location where earlier footage showed Palestinian detainees with injuries that medical professionals described as consistent with severe physical assault. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. This reporting has been building for months. The documentation is extensive. The sources are multiple and independent. And yet, if you consume mainstream American media as your primary source of information, there is a significant chance you are hearing about this in any serious depth for the first time right now. Why? I want to offer you what I believe is the honest answer. And again, I am framing this as analysis rather than established fact. There is a structural dynamic in American media where criticism of Israeli government conduct has been so consistently conflated with anti-Semitism that journalists, editors, and producers have developed an institutional reflex to avoid the topic entirely. Not because the reporting is inaccurate, but because the professional and social cost of being labeled anti-Semitic in a major American newsroom is high enough that the path of least resistance is silence. And silence in this context is not neutral. Silence is a choice. And that choice has consequences. Because here is what happens when an institution, any institution in any country, successfully labels all of its critics as bigots. Dissent disappears from the public conversation. And when dissent disappears, internal accountability disappears with it. The people inside that institution who might otherwise raise concerns go quiet. The culture shifts. And in that silence, the kind of conduct I have just described becomes possible, becomes normalized, becomes, in the minds of those carrying it out, justified. That last word is the one I want you to hold on to, justified. Because at the core of what we are seeing, the drone strikes during a ceasefire, the money plow, the destroyed statue, the detention facility allegations, there is a single ideological thread running through all of it. The belief that because we are the good guys and they are the bad guys, anything we do in pursuit of that conflict is morally permissible. That is not a uniquely Israeli pathology. That is a human one. We have seen it in American foreign policy. We have seen it in every empire that has ever convinced itself that its violence was categorically different from the violence of its enemies. But recognizing it as a human pattern does not make it less dangerous. It makes it more dangerous because it means it can happen anywhere. And it means that the only thing standing between that ideology and its worst possible outcomes is exactly the kind of scrutiny that is currently being suppressed. Let's pull all the way back now, because I want you to see the full picture, not just the individual events, but the architecture of what is actually happening here. What we have witnessed in the past week is not a ceasefire violation. It is not a diplomatic stumble. It is a stress test of the entire framework that governs American influence in the Middle East. And based on the results of that stress test, I want to walk you through 3 scenarios, 3 directions this can realistically move in the coming weeks and months. Scenario 1, the current dynamic continues. Israel continues to operate in Lebanon under the cover of ceasefire language that has no enforcement mechanism. Trump continues to issue public statements that are ignored on the ground and compensated for with unconditional praise. American aid continues to flow without conditions that are actually enforced. In this scenario, the ceasefire becomes a permanent fiction, a diplomatic label applied to an ongoing military operation. Iran concludes that American guarantees are worthless and either accelerates its nuclear program or finds alternative leverage points in the region. The situation does not explode immediately. It metastasizes slowly until it does explode, at a time and in a manner that no one currently has the ability to predict or control. Scenario 2. The diplomatic framework fractures publicly. Iran formally withdraws from any nuclear negotiation track, citing the collapse of the Lebanon ceasefire as evidence that American commitments cannot be trusted. This creates a cascade. Other regional actors recalibrate their relationships with Washington. The cost of American credibility, already under pressure, increases dramatically. This is the scenario that foreign policy professionals who are paying close attention describe in private conversations as the one that keeps them up at night. Scenario 3. Domestic pressure inside the United States actually changes the calculation. This is the scenario that would have seemed least likely 12 months ago, but is now for the first time worth taking seriously. The image of a soldier smashing a statue of Jesus Christ. The detention facility allegations reaching mainstream awareness. Public opinion among conservative Christian voters, the core of the political coalition that provides Netanyahu his most reliable American cover, beginning to shift in measurable ways. If that shift reaches a threshold where elected officials feel political cost rather than political benefit from unconditional support, the policy space opens. Not dramatically, not immediately, but it opens. I want to be honest with you. I do not know which of these scenarios plays out. Anyone who tells you they do is selling you certainty they do not possess. What I can tell you is that the window in which any of these trajectories can be influenced is narrow, and it is closing. Let me bring this home. 3 things are now undeniable. First, a ceasefire without enforcement is not a ceasefire. It is a press release. Second, when defiance is met with praise, defiance becomes the rational strategy. Third, the silence of mainstream media on what is happening inside these detention facilities is not journalism. It is a choice, and that choice has a cost. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If an ally can publicly ignore a direct order from the President of the United States on the same day it is issued and face 0 consequences, then what does the word ally actually mean? And more importantly, who is serving whose interests? I do not have a clean answer for you. But I believe the fact that we are asking the question out loud, that more and more people are asking it, matters. If this analysis gave you something that the mainstream conversation is not giving you, hit the like button. Not for me, because the algorithm responds to that signal and pushes this kind of analysis toward people who need to hear it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because the next 48 hours will move fast. I will be here when they do.